Welcome to the show. Dr. Lee Konowe, I want to start with a moment every agent knows. You've had the lounge chat, you've walked the property, everybody's nodding, and then that agency agreement comes out. That is the moment the whole thing changes. It stops being a nice real estate conversation and becomes a lawful working relationship.
That phrase you used, lawful working relationship, that's the hinge, isn't it? Because a lot of people hear agency agreement and think clipboard, signatures, admin. But what you're really saying is the document creates authority. It tells the agent what they may do, what the client expects, and where the risk sits if things go wrong.
Exactly. And after 25 years in real estate across a few continents, I can tell you this is where experienced agents slow down and newer agents often speed up. They think, I know these owners. We've already discussed it. Let's get the form signed and move on. No, the agreement is not the tail end of the conversation, it is the deal.
Which is awkward for people who treat it like the parsley on the plate. Decorative, technically present, nobody respecting it.
Yes, and parsley is harmless. A sloppy agency agreement is not. It defines who the client is, what services are being provided, how long the relationship lasts, and what the commercial arrangement is. If any of that is fuzzy, you've built your whole transaction on fog.
Build it on fog is memorable. And from the psychology angle, people routinely assume shared understanding when there isn't any. One party thinks, "You're selling my home." The other thinks, "I'm authorized to market under these terms until this date." Those are not the same thought, even if both people feel positive in the moment.
Right. Feelings are not compliance. Good intentions are not clarity. And this matters because agency work in New Zealand sits inside real legal obligations. If the agreement is weak, the client may not be protected properly, and the agent may be exposed in ways that were completely preventable.
Let me push that a bit. When you say preventable, do you mean dramatic disputes, tribunal level trouble, that sort of thing? Or the everyday, almost boring mistakes?
Mostly the boring mistakes, and those are the dangerous ones. Rushed signatures, missing details, assumptions that everyone understands, starting work before everything is properly settled in writing. Those little shortcuts feel efficient at 4:30 on a Friday and very expensive later.
That 4:30 Friday image, yeah, every profession has its version of that. The tired brain starts saying, close enough.
And close enough is not the standard. So today we're keeping this practical, what the agreement actually does, the six core principles underneath it, what needs to be in writing, where agents get caught out, and the simple habits that keep you compliant while protecting your client.
So, not law lecture, not scare tactics, just the agent's field guide. How to set up the relationship properly so you can actually do the work without guessing what you're allowed to do.
That's it. If an agent takes one thing from this episode, I want it to be this: the agency agreement is not what happens after trust is built. It is one of the ways trust is built.
All right, let's pin down the mechanics. In plain language, the agency relationship begins when the client signs the agency agreement, not when they say, "Yep, sounds good," not when they text, "Go ahead." The signed agreement is the starting line.
And that timing matters because once it's signed, everybody should know we now have a defined relationship. Usually that relationship ends when the property sells or when the agreement expires. Again, practical point. There needs to be an end point, not some vague sense that you're still kind of working on it.
That phrase, "still kind of working on it," is exactly how trouble sneaks in. If the agreement starts on signature and usually ends on sale or expiry, then agents need to know which of those two clocks they're dealing with at all times.
Yes, and also agency work is broader than many people casually say. We often hear agents talk as though this is only about listing a house for sale. It's not that narrow. Real estate agency work involves services related to buying, selling, and leasing properties.
Buying, selling, and leasing. Those three words matter because if a listener mentally files agency agreements under seller listing paperwork, they're already missing part of the picture.
Absolutely. The agreement is the record of who is doing what, for whom, and on what terms. That's the plain English version. Who is the client? What service is the agent providing? What are the expectations? What is the commercial arrangement? How long does this apply?
Let me try to explain it back. It's basically the operating manual for the relationship.
Almost. More than a manual. A manual tells you how to use something. This tells you what has actually been agreed. That difference is huge. If it's not recorded clearly, people start filling gaps with memory, hope, or convenience.
Memory, hope, or convenience. That's a dangerous trio. And memory is especially unreliable. Two people can leave the same meeting with two different versions of what was obvious.
That's why the written agreement matters so much. It anchors the relationship. If the client later asks, "What exactly were you authorized to do?" or the agent thinks, "I understood we had agreed on these terms," the answer shouldn't depend on who sounds more confident. It should be in the agreement.
And for agents, that record also reduces that low grade anxiety. You know the one, the mental static of, did we actually cover that?
Yes, and professionalism loves certainty. Good agents are not just good at rapport, they're good at defining the working relationship cleanly from day one. That protects the client and it protects the agent's ability to perform the service without confusion.
So the agreement doesn't get in the way of the real work. It's the thing that lets the real work happen on solid ground.
Perfectly put. When it's done right, everybody knows where they stand. And once people know where they stand, the transaction tends to run a whole lot smoother. Let's decode the 6 principles behind agency agreements because agents hear these words and sometimes switch off. Don't. In plain language, these are the bones holding the whole thing up: mutual consent, legality, capacity, consideration, certainty, and intent.
Six is manageable. Let's go one at a time. Start with mutual consent because that sounds simple and often isn't.
Exactly. Mutual consent means both parties genuinely agree to the terms. Not "we sort of skimmed it." Not "they signed where I pointed." Genuine agreement. If the client doesn't really understand what they're signing, don't kid yourself that a signature magically fixes that.
That signed where I pointed line will stick with me because psychologically, people often comply in the room. They don't want to look awkward, don't want to slow things down, and they assume they'll sort it out later. That is not the same as informed agreement.
Right. Then legality. The agreement must comply with New Zealand law to be enforceable. Agents don't need to become courtroom philosophers, but they do need to understand this. If your agreement doesn't line up with the law, calling it an agreement won't save it.
Enforceable is the key word there. A document can exist physically and still fail in the moment it's tested.
Then capacity. Both parties must have the legal ability to enter the contract. Sounds obvious, but agents can get sloppy here by assuming the person in front of them automatically has the authority and capacity to contract. Assumptions are expensive.
And the person in front of them is a useful way to say it. Presence is not proof. Just because someone is sitting at the table doesn't answer whether they can legally commit to the agreement.
Exactly. Next is consideration. That's the value exchanged in the deal, often commission for the agent. There has to be some value moving between the parties. This is one reason the commercial terms can't be hand wavy.
Often commission grounds it nicely. The listener can picture that immediately. Services on one side, payment on the other.
And certainty. Contracts must be clear and specific about what is being agreed. This is where agents get caught out constantly. Vague terms, generic wording, little phrases that everybody nods at because they sound normal. If the terms aren't clear, certainty is weak.
I think certainty may be the sleeper issue here, because vague terms sounds harmless until you realize vagueness is just delayed conflict. It's an argument with a timer on it.
That is beautifully said. And finally, intent. Both parties must genuinely intend to enter the agreement. This is a real commitment, not a pretend placeholder until somebody decides what they really meant later.
So if I bundle those six together, genuine agreement, lawful agreement, capable parties, value exchanged, clear terms, real intent. That's the structure.
Yes, and for agents, the practical traps are very ordinary. Rushing the signature, leaving terms vague, and assuming everyone understands. Experienced agents don't rely on atmosphere, they rely on clarity.
Atmosphere is not evidence. There's the fridge magnet. Let's talk about the temptation. An agent has a good conversation, everyone's comfortable, and somebody says, "No worries, we've talked it through." That is exactly when oral shortcuts start looking attractive.
And that's exactly when discipline matters. Having a written agency agreement is crucial for clarity and protection. Crucial, not nice to have, not best practice if you have time. It creates a clear record of the relationship and the terms attached to it.
Clarity and protection. Two words, very practical. Clarity for the day to day, protection when memory gets selective.
Yes, in writing, the agreement needs to clearly record the scope of work, the expectations, and the commercial terms tied to the relationship. In other words, what are you doing? What is the client expecting? And what are the agreed business terms around that work?
Scope, expectations, commercial terms. That triad is memorable. If any one of those three is fuzzy, the whole arrangement gets unstable.
Exactly. And oral shortcuts backfire because spoken understandings are fragile. People hear what they expect to hear. They remember the parts that suit them. They forget the bits that were only mentioned quickly. A proper written agreement takes that wobble out of the relationship.
Give me the most common shortcut you've seen agents take.
Starting work before the paperwork is complete. That one is incredibly common. The agent thinks, I'll sort the details after I get moving. But if the agreement is what establishes the working relationship, then doing the work first and tidying the agreement later is backwards.
Backwards is the exact word. It's like taking off in the plane and saying you'll file the flight plan after landing. As one time pilot adjacent me would prefer, not ideal.
Not ideal at all. Another mistake is relying on verbal understandings. We said that on the phone. We discussed that at the appraisal. Maybe you did. But if it isn't clearly recorded, you're now trusting recollection instead of documentation.
And recollection degrades fast. Not in 6 years, in days, sometimes in the car ride home.
Then there's generic language. Agents use wording so broad it doesn't actually clarify anything. They think they're being efficient, but generic language creates ambiguity, and ambiguity is the enemy of certainty.
Generic language creates ambiguity is another one worth remembering. Because vague wording can feel professional, it looks official. It just doesn't do enough work.
That's right. A written agreement should leave less room for guessing, not more. If you ever find yourself saying, "Well, we all knew what we meant," stop. That sentence is usually the warning light on the dashboard.
Which means writing isn't bureaucracy here. Writing is how you make the agreement real, testable, and fair to both sides.
Let's get very field level now. Where do agents actually stumble? Incomplete forms, unclear expiry terms, missing signatures, and one that gets underestimated all the time, not checking whether the client truly understands the agreement.
That list is painfully ordinary, which is why it matters. Incomplete forms and missing signatures don't sound dramatic until they become the whole issue.
Exactly. A lot of compliance problems aren't born from bad motives. They come from rushing. The conversation feels fine, the relationship feels friendly, the agent wants momentum, and suddenly details are left half done. But half done paperwork creates full sized problems.
Half done paperwork creates full sized problems. That one has teeth. And unclear expiry terms are especially interesting to me because time is one of those things people assume is obvious. It usually isn't.
Quite right. If the agreement usually ends when the property is sold or the agreement expires, then expiry has to be clear, not implied, not, "we'll know it when we get there." Clear. Agents should be able to point to it, and clients should be able to understand it.
What about changes? Because this feels like another danger zone. Everybody signs, then something shifts, and the room says, "No problem, we've agreed to the update."
Yes, and that's where failure to document changes properly bites. If the relationship changes, the record needs to reflect that. Otherwise, the paperwork says one thing while the people think another. That gap is where compliance trouble loves to live.
Paperwork says one thing, people think another. That's almost the definition of avoidable conflict.
It is. So here's the practical angle I'd use before leaving the table or sending paperwork. I would double check that the agreement is complete, that the terms are clear, that the expiry is obvious, that all needed signatures are there, and that the client has actually understood what they are entering into.
Complete, clear, expiry obvious, signatures there, understanding confirmed. 5 checks before you walk away.
Yes, and I'd add one mindset piece. Do not confuse silence with understanding. Some clients are quiet because they're comfortable. Some are quiet because they're lost. The agent's job is to know which is which.
That is such an important distinction. Silence can mean agreement or embarrassment or overload. Same outward behavior, 3 different realities.
Which is why good agents don't just present the agreement, they work through it. They create room for questions. They listen for hesitation. They make sure the document and the human understanding match.
So the experienced agent's superpower isn't speed, it's catching the tiny mismatch before it turns into a very expensive, very official mismatch later. The nice thing about good agency agreement practice is that it's not only defensive. Yes, it helps avoid trouble, but it also creates a cleaner, calmer working relationship from day one.
Absolutely. Good practice protects both sides. The client gets clear expectations about what the agent is doing and on what terms. The agent gets a solid, documented foundation for the work. That is not red tape, that is professional structure.
And the safeguards here are wonderfully unglamorous. Use plain language, confirm understanding, keep records, check the agreement against current legal requirements. None of that is flashy. All of it is useful.
Plain language is a big one for me. If an agent can't explain the agreement in ordinary English, there's a problem. Clients should not need a decoder ring. The clearer the language, the stronger the trust, and the lower the risk of misunderstanding.
Decoder ring is good because jargon can create fake confidence. Everyone nods because the words sound official, while actual understanding quietly leaves the room.
Yes, and confirming understanding means more than asking, "Any questions?" Sometimes people say no because they don't know what to ask. Better to check in a way that actually tests clarity. Make sure both sides genuinely understand the terms they are entering.
That's subtle but huge. Any questions often produces politeness. Real confirmation produces information.
Then keep records. Good records support clarity, consistency, and accountability. If something needs to be checked later, you want the written trail to help you, not haunt you.
Help you, not haunt you. Every administrator in New Zealand just nodded.
Quite. And finally, check the agreement against current legal requirements because compliance is not a vibe. It is not, "I've done it this way for years." It needs to line up with what is required now.
That phrase, done it this way for years, can be dangerous in any profession. Experience is valuable, but only if it stays current.
Exactly. And this is the takeaway I want agents to sit with. Compliance isn't just about avoiding trouble, it's about professionalism, trust, and better client outcomes. When the agreement is clear, lawful, and properly understood, people can move forward with confidence.
Which means the agency agreement is really a test of intent. Are we just trying to get the signature and move on? Or are we trying to build a relationship that can carry pressure when the transaction gets stressful?
That's the real question, because transactions always get a bit stressful somewhere. The agents who handle that best are usually the ones who got the foundation right before the stress arrived.
Get the foundation right before the stress arrives. That's a good place to leave it.
Thanks for joining us.
See you next time.